Welcome to today's explainer. Let's just dive right in, shall we? Take a second and just picture the human mind. We usually think of it as this quiet little sanctuary, right? A useful tool. But ancient texts, they paint a totally different picture. They describe the mind as an epic, highly volatile battlefield. And the crazy thing is, it doesn't take an entire army to cause total destruction up there. It literally just takes one single, unchecked emotion to set off a catastrophic chain reaction. So today, we're unpacking a really profound psychological deconstruction from the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, specifically chapter 2, verse 63. We're going to look at the exact anatomy of a downward spiral. From anger arises infatuation. From infatuation, confusion of memory. From confusion of memory, loss of reason. And from loss of reason, one goes to complete ruin. Just let that sink in for a second. This isn't just some nice poetic philosophy. It is a clinical, step-by-step diagnosis of a psychological collapse. The source material establishes the stakes right out of the gate. We're not talking about, just having a bad day at work or losing your temper for a minute. We're talking about an inevitable, structured downward spiral that ends in the total loss of the self. To really get the gravity of this, we've got to ground this explainer in its ancient roots. Looking at the authentic Sanskrit text here, it carries literally thousands of years of psychological observation. It goes, Krodad bhavati samoha samohat smriti vibrama, smriti bramshad buddhinasho buddhinashad pranashati. And what's brilliant is that the structure of the verse itself actually mimics a cascade. Each word just tumbles directly into the next one, perfectly mirroring the mental collapse it's describing. So let's break down exactly what this ancient verse is telling us. It helps to think of these 5 stages as a set of perfectly aligned falling dominoes. Stage 1 is anger. Bam, that knocks into stage 2, delusion, which then topples right into stage 3, loss of memory. That crashes into stage 4, loss of reason, and finally, everything lands at stage 5, complete ruin. The scary part? Once that first domino gets pushed, momentum just completely takes over. All right, let's look at stage 1, Krodha, the spark of anger. Krodha translates directly to anger or wrath. And this is it. This is the singular, unchecked emotion that pushes our first domino. We're not talking about mild annoyance because someone cut you off in traffic, right? The text defines this as a forceful, blinding wrath. It's the spark falling into the dry tinder of the human mind. Literally everything that follows, every single catastrophic failure of logic and self-control traces back to this one specific moment where anger is allowed to take root. Now, to understand where this spark actually comes from, the source material gives us some incredible depth just one chapter later. Chapter 3, verse 37 explains that anger doesn't just, appear out of thin air. It's born of rajas, which is the element of passion and active desire. When a deep desire is thwarted or blocked, it transforms into wrath. The text literally describes this anger as an insatiable and grossly wicked enemy. It's basically a hunger that cannot be fed, a fire that only grows larger the more fuel you throw at it. Which brings us to stage 2, samaha, the fog of delusion. So the second domino falls. Sammoha means infatuation, delusion, or just an extremely foolish state of mind. When Krodha hijacks the brain, this thick fog rolls in. In modern psychology, we'd actually call this an amygdala hijack, right? That's where your emotional brain literally shuts down your logical brain. You're trapped in the fog of sammoha, completely blinded to facts, logic, and context. You've probably experienced this yourself, or at least seen it in others. When someone is truly enraged, they literally cannot see the situation clearly anymore. Moving right along to stage 3, memory lost or smriti vibhramaha. This fog of delusion inevitably brings us to smriti vibrama. This means the confusion or wandering of memory. Because here's the thing, sanmoha doesn't just blind you to the present moment, it actively disconnects you from your past. Under the spell of delusion, a person literally forgets who they are. They forget all the logical frameworks they've spent years building up. They forget their past lessons, their core values, their true nature. The anger has now effectively isolated the individual from their own wisdom. They're just completely adrift. Now we hit the point of no return. Stages 4 and 5, intellect to ruin. Once that anchor of memory is totally severed, the descent speeds up fast, triggering our 4th domino, buddhi nasho. Buddhi refers to our intellect, our reasoning, our power of discrimination, basically the very thing that makes us capable of choosing right from wrong. The text clearly states that this confusion of memory directly leads to the destruction of the intellect. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. If you can't remember your past lessons or your core values, how on earth can you make a rational decision? You can't. The reasoning mind is shattered. The internal compass is totally destroyed. And that brings us to the ultimate end of the line, pranashyati, complete ruin, utter self-destruction. Without reason, without any intellect, a person falls entirely from their standing. And to be clear, this isn't just making a silly mistake. It is a total collapse of the individual's position in life, their relationships, and their spiritual well-being. All the dominoes have fallen. That initial spark of anger has successfully burned the entire house to the ground. Okay, let's pivot to breaking the chain, the antidote. It's a pretty terrifying sequence, isn't it? But here is exactly why this explainer matters, and what you should really take away from all this. We absolutely do not have to be victims of this cascade. Right after this grim diagnosis of ruin, Chapter 2, verse 64 reveals the antidote, the disciplined mind. Notice that the text doesn't tell us to run away from the world, or, go hide in a cave to avoid ever getting angry. Instead, it introduces a highly practical psychological discipline. We can exist right here in the real world, interacting with all of its triggers, without ever knocking over that first domino. Let's just compare these two mindsets side by side. On one hand, you have the uncontrolled mind from verse 63. It's driven entirely by raw likes and dislikes, completely susceptible to the insatiable enemy of anger, and it cascades inevitably to ruin. On the flip side, look at the disciplined mind from verse 64. This is the self-controlled practicant. They still move among sense objects. They live in the messy real world, but their senses are strictly controlled. Because they're free from intense attachment, from those violent likes and dislikes, the spark of Krodha simply finds absolutely zero fuel to ignite. So, what's the reward for all this discipline? The text gives us this absolutely beautiful word for it, prasada. It means placidity, tranquility, or just ultimate peace of mind. When you break the domino effect, when you regulate your senses and prevent anger from taking root in the first place, you don't just avoid ruin. You actually actively achieve a state of profound mental clarity and joy. The mind stops being this volatile, dangerous battlefield and finally becomes that quiet, unshakable sanctuary we all want. We've mapped out the whole ancient psychological chain reaction today, from that very first flash of wrath all the way to complete and total ruin. And we've seen the liberating antidote of self-discipline. The blueprint of the human mind has essentially been laid out for us. So I'm going to leave you with this final, lingering thought to reflect on. The next time the spark of Krodha ignites in your life, and let's be real, it definitely will, are you going to let the dominoes fall?